All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to the Explainer. Now, just to set the stage, this is chapter 2 of the 3 closing chapters for the final part of the book we've been going through. Basically, these final sections act as the closing statements for the overarching ideas presented in the entire text. And today, we are looking at a chapter appropriately titled The Reaper. We're going to be exploring the catastrophic real-world wreckage that happens when abstract, bad ideas are paired with absolute, unyielding power. We'll be tracing the historical postmortem of the bloodiest century in recorded human history.
To really grasp the immense tragedies of the 20th century, we first have to understand the goal that actually drove them. Think about the word utopia. We hear it all the time, right? Well, it was coined by Sir Thomas More way back in 1516. It's a mashup of 2 Greek words meaning not and place. So literally, it translates to no place or nowhere. The text we're analyzing points out that this is literally the perfect word to describe these radical socialist and communist projects. The word itself inherently implies that a flawless, perfect society simply does not and cannot actually exist. So, by definition, the utopian project is a total exercise in futility.
And this brings us to a brilliant illustration of the core philosophical conflict at the heart of our explainer today. The text draws a really sharp line between philosophy and ideology. True philosophy, it's about reforming our subjective desires to match objective truth. It's like an anchor for a society. Ideology, on the flip side, is what happens when a society loses that anchor and starts to drift. Ideology attempts to reform objective truth to match our subjective desires. Instead of aligning with reality, ideologues try to bend reality to fit their vision of nowhere. And when that happens, well, the stage is set for absolute disaster. Section 1. Joseph Stalin. Marxist fallout. Let's look at our first historical example to see how this builds into tangible devastation. We're starting our genealogy of tyrants with Joseph Stalin, the man who took Karl Marx's theories off the page and turned them into brutal, agonizing reality. Now, the crucial point here is the relationship between the thinker and the dictator. Our source material argues that Stalin didn't really go off script from Marx's vision of a classless society. The difference was the means, not necessarily the ends. Marx just lacked the absolute authority to enact his ideas. Stalin didn't. He had totalitarian control, and he completely weaponized Marx's concept of class struggle. He took the theory and applied it with relentless force. It proves that an idea without power is just a theory, but give that same idea absolute power, and it becomes a devastating weapon.
So let's look at the actual wreckage here. These were Stalin's main mechanisms of control. The Great Purge saw up to 1.2 million perceived enemies executed. Then there was the Holodomor, a man-made famine in Ukraine driven by forced collectivization that literally starved between 3 and 7 million people to death. Add to that the millions who perished in the brutal Gulag labor camps and the forced deportations of entire ethnic groups. The text notes that even conservative estimates place Stalin's death toll at 9 million, with higher estimates reaching well over 20 million lives. That is what Marxist fallout looks like.
Section 2. Adolf Hitler, Social Darwinism in Action. Moving the timeline forward and geographically westward, we get to Adolf Hitler. The text outlines how he absorbed entirely different intellectual currents than Stalin did. He specifically tapped into Charles Darwin's theories of natural selection and Friedrich Nietzsche's concepts of the Superman. Now, publicly, Hitler manipulated Christian imagery, signing treaties with the Vatican and promoting a twisted, positive Christianity just to unify the German people. But privately, the source material notes he absolutely despised traditional faith. He viewed Christianity as a flabby and meek religion. He felt its emphasis on compassion and humility was totally incompatible with his aggressive, militaristic, and social Darwinist vision of a dominant Aryan race. And this brilliantly illustrates the horrific logical conclusion of adopting a survival of the fittest ideology for human society. Even before the wider Holocaust, there was the T4 euthanasia program. Rooted deeply in eugenics, this secret program targeted the disabled, individuals who were deemed a burden to the state and unfit for the pure Aryan race. It utilized early gas chambers and lethal injections, claiming the lives of an estimated 275,000 victims. The text highlights this as the grim, tangible fruit of social Darwinism. It shows our devastating human capacity to justify ultimate evil simply by claiming it's for the greater good.
Section 3. Mao Zedong, the utopian nightmare.
Shifting our focus over to China, another massive ideological experiment was unfolding under Mao Zedong. He wanted to completely restructure an ancient agrarian society into a communist utopia. Mao actually captured his worldview in his famous Little Red Book, and this specific quote is just chillingly instructive. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. You see, for Mao, violence wasn't an unfortunate byproduct. It wasn't an accident. It was a fundamental necessity. It was the essential tool for class struggle. The text emphasizes that Mao viewed the violent overthrow of classes as the very engine of historical progress. Just take a second to really think about this number: 15 to 45 million. This staggering figure represents the estimated death toll from starvation and flawed policies during Mao's Great Leap Forward. It was this massively ambitious attempt to rapidly industrialize and collectivize agriculture. Traditional farming was totally upended, unproven techniques were mandated, and local officials inflated their crop yields out of sheer fear. This led the state to export grain while its own population starved to death. It is a terrifying testament to what happens when ideological compliance completely overrides basic reality.
Section 4. Pol Pot, Agrarian Terror.
The ideological current then flows next door to Cambodia in 1975, where Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge attempted what was perhaps the most radical utopian experiment of them all, creating a completely agrarian socialist society literally overnight. The text details the step-by-step psychological warfare they deployed. First step, forcibly evacuate all cities and herd the population into collective farms. Second, systematically dismantle traditional family structures. Children were separated from their parents and marriages were arranged by the state. And finally, they sought to erase individual identities and cultural history, destroying temples and executing intellectuals. The whole goal was to replace all familial and cultural bonds with absolute, unquestioning loyalty to the state. The crucial point here is the sheer scale of the devastation in such an incredibly short amount of time. Between 1975 and 1979, that is just 4 years, guys. An estimated 1.5 to 2 million people were killed by execution, forced labor, and starvation. That is roughly 25%, a full quarter of the entire Cambodian population wiped out. And the remaining 75%, they only survived under a regime of severe, paranoid repression. Section 5. The Shipwreck. Tangible wreckage and modern echoes. All right, having completed this really grim historical postmortem, we need to pivot to the overarching conclusion of this chapter. We have to look at the aggregated shipwreck these ideas caused, and crucially, how these ideological currents are still flowing today. This is the ultimate horrific fruit of giving bad ideas absolute power. The combined death toll of just these 4 regimes, Stalin, Hitler, Mao, and Pol Pot, sits at an estimated minimum of 78.5 million and reaches as high as 114 million lives lost. The text makes it explicitly clear, ideas have consequences. When you take the devaluation of human life, or you categorize all of society into merely oppressors and oppressed, and then you pair that with unyielding authority, this number is the inevitable result. And listen, we absolutely cannot fool ourselves into thinking this is entirely a thing of the past. The source material draws a direct line from these past ideologies to the present day, specifically highlighting the digital dictatorship currently operating in China. They've implemented a social credit system, tracking behavior to ensure total compliance. High scores grant you privileges, but low scores, they result in severe penalties, travel bans, and public blacklists. It's basically a modern mechanism for forcing the subjective desires of the state onto objective reality, ensuring that nonconformity becomes virtually impossible. So the utopian project isn't just history. Its mechanisms are actively suppressing life and liberty right now as we speak. The text points to the ongoing Uyghur internment camps, horrifying reports of organ harvesting, and the staggering legacy of the one-child policy, which resulted in an estimated 336 million forced abortions and massive social engineering. The absolute power of the state continues to act as a reaper of human life and dignity. Now, the author of our source text issues a profound and deeply personal challenge here. We tend to look at these dictators as monsters, right? But the text asks us to look in the mirror. These men justified their atrocities by believing they were acting for the greater good. That capacity to justify evil lies within human nature itself. The text asks a hard question. If you were handed absolute, unchecked power, are you truly certain you wouldn't repeat the evils of this chapter? It's a question meant to strip away all our comfortable self-righteousness. Which brings us to the closing thought of this chapter. The author brackets the section with this verse from Romans, and it serves as a really somber anchor for the overarching theme of the whole book. The wreckage of the 20th century wasn't just a political failure, it was a deeply human one. The explainer leaves us with an urgent invitation to recognize the bad ideas in our own time, to resist the urge to reform truth to our desires, and to work to restore a society anchored in objective reality. So I'll leave you with this. If we don't learn from this history, what shipwreck awaits our own generation?